Welcome back to the deep dive. We're plunging into some really fascinating historical waters today.
We really are. We're looking at a pretty dramatic moment from early Buddhism.
Exactly. It involves a figure named Devadatta and, well, a major attempt to split the early monastic community, the Sangha.
A schism, basically. And we're drawing this from a really core text, right? The Saṅghādisesa rules.
That's the one. Specifically, rule number 10. It's foundational monastic law that came directly out of this event.
Mm-hmm.
So our mission today is really to unpack this. What were Devadatta's tactics? They were quite cunning.
Devious, even.
Yeah, and then how did the Buddha respond? Because his response was incredibly nuanced.
Right, not just a simple yes or no.
And finally, how this whole kind of dramatic episode led directly to this lasting monastic rule. A rule designed really to keep the community together.
So we're looking at intrigue, spiritual principles, leadership challenges, all wrapped up in this one historical event.
Absolutely. Okay, let's set the scene. Where and when are we?
We're in ancient India in the city of Rajaga, specifically at a place called Veyavang Kalandakanivope.
Which sounds quite peaceful, actually. A bamboo grove, a squirrel sanctuary.
You'd think so. But it's the backdrop for this plot. Devadatta is there, and he's not alone. He's got allies.
Right. The text mentions Kukalika, Kamarakatisaka, and Samuddadatta. So what's their big plan? What's Devadatta aiming for?
Well, his goal is huge. The text says he wants to break the Sangha, cause a schism. The Pali term is kakabeda.
And breaking the wheel. That sounds serious. The Sangha wasn't just like a club, right?
Not at all. It was the community the Buddha set up to practice and preserve the teachings, the Dharma. So breaking it, that's attacking the very structure, the very order.
It's a fundamental challenge.
Absolutely. It was so significant that Kokalika apparently hesitated at first. He knew how influential the Buddha was. It gives you a sense of the sheer audacity of it.
Okay, so that's the what. How did he plan to actually do it? How do you break something like the Sangha? What was the strategy?
It was clever in a way. His plan was to go to the Buddha and ask him to enforce 5 really strict ascetic practices on all the monks.
Okay.
But here's the twist. He fully expected the Buddha to refuse. He wanted him to refuse.
Why? What was the angle there?
Because then he could turn around and say, look, see? The Buddha is becoming lax, indulgent. We are the ones who are truly dedicated, truly ascetic. He planned to use the refusal as propaganda, basically.
Wow. Okay. That is cunning. So what were these 5 points, these 5 vathuni? They must have been pretty extreme.
They were specific, and demanding them for everyone was the radical part. So number 1, monks had to be forest dwellers for life. If you even set foot in a village, that's a fault.
For life. No exception.
That was the demand. Second, alms food seekers for life, meaning you couldn't accept an invitation for a meal from a lay supporter, only gather food bowl to bowl. Accepting an invitation. Fault.
Okay. Very restrictive. What's third?
Rag robe wearers for life. Monks should only wear robes made from discarded scraps of cloth. Accepting a new robe offered by a householder. Fault.
Number 4.
Tree root dwellers for life. No sleeping under a roof, basically. Always out in the open at the foot of a tree. Entering a covered dwelling. Fault.
And the last one, number 5.
No fish or meat, ever. Completely vegetarian, strictly. Eating any fish or meat, fault.
So were these practices completely unheard of? Or was it just making them mandatory that was the issue?
That's exactly it. Some monks already did these things voluntarily, as part of their own personal commitment to austerity.
Right.
But Devadatta wasn't asking for them to be options. He wanted them enforced, compulsory for every single monk with a formal fault of ajah attached if they didn't comply.
Which is totally different from the Buddha's usual style, isn't it? More about individual choice.
Precisely. The Buddha generally encouraged discipline suited to the individual, not a rigid one-size-fits-all approach. Devadatta's plan was about compulsion, not voluntary practice.
Okay, so Devadatta and his group go to the Buddha. They make these demands. This is the big confrontation. How does the Buddha handle it?
His response is, well, it's classic Buddha, really. Very direct, but also very wise. He just says, Allah Devadatta.
Which means?
Enough, Devadatta. Simple as that. But then he clarifies. He says, look, for monks who want to follow these strict practices, forest dwelling, alms food only, etc., they can. It's permitted.
Ah, so he didn't forbid them.
No. He allowed them as optional paths for those drawn to them, but he refused to make them mandatory for everyone.
It's such a balanced approach. Practicality over, dogmatic purity.
Exactly. It preserved the possibility of strict practice for those suited to it, but didn't impose it on everyone, potentially overwhelming them or making the path inaccessible. It kept the community broad and sustainable.
And didn't he give specific examples? I remember reading something about the tree root dwelling in meat.
Yes, the source mentions that. He pointed out he'd allowed tree root dwelling for, I think it was 8 months of the year, suggesting it wasn't necessarily a lifelong year-round thing for everyone.
Okay.
And on the fish and meat point, he reiterated his existing stance. It's okay if it's tikku parisutta.
Meaning?
Pure in 3 ways. The monk didn't see the animal being killed, didn't hear it being killed, and crucially, doesn't suspect it was killed specifically for them.
So again, focusing on intention and circumstance, not just a blanket ban.
Right. It's about not encouraging the taking of life, rather than a simple dietary rule in itself.
Okay, so the Buddha says enough, refuses the mandatory rules, but allows them as options. And Devadatta, he's happy about this.
That text says he was delighted and elated, which, as you said, tells you everything. His plan worked, in a sense. He got the refusal he wanted.
So what does he do? Runs off to spread the word.
Immediately, heads straight back to Rajagaha and starts his propaganda campaign. He tells people, we asked for these pure ascetic practices and the Buddha refused. He's living in abundance, aiming for indulgence.
Wow. Twisting the Buddha's balanced approach into a sign of weakness or luxury.
Exactly, painting himself and his followers as the real ascetics.
And how did people react? Was it effective?
It caused an immediate split. The text is quite blunt about it. It says some people, described as unbelieving, foolish people, bought it.
And it uses that interesting phrase.
Right. Luka pasana hiyavuso manusa, which means something like, men are pleased by harshness, or attracted to roughness.
That's quite insightful about human psychology, isn't it?
Yeah.
People equating harshness with sincerity.
It really is. So these people started saying, yeah, the Sakyaputya monks, Devadatta's guys, they are the strict ones, the real deal. Gautama, the Buddha, he's gone soft, aiming for indulgence.
A classic case of manipulating the idea of purity for divisive ends.
Definitely. It shows how easily appearances, especially of extreme austerity, can sway people if they aren't discerning.
But not everyone bought it, right?
No, thankfully. The text says the faithful, wise people were appalled. They complained, asking how Devadatta could possibly try to break the Sangha's unity.
So word gets back to the Buddha pretty quickly, presumably from these concerned monks.
Yes, monks who valued simplicity but also harmony reported what Devadatta was doing.
And the Buddha confronts him again.
He does, and Devadatta, maybe surprisingly, maybe not, admits his intention was to cause a schism.
He admits it.
Yes, and the Buddha gives him a sharp rebuke. How can you, foolish person, attempt to break the Sangha?
So this whole affair, this direct attempt and the division it caused, this must have consequences.
Huge consequences. This entire incident is basically the origin story for a major monastic rule, Saṅghādisesa number 10.
Saṅghādisesa. Well, that sounds serious. What kind of offense is that?
It's one of the most serious categories, second only to parajika offenses, which mean expulsion. A Saṅghādisesa offense requires a formal meeting of the Sangha, a period of probation and rehabilitation for the monk involved. It's not taken lightly at all. The text even specifies the procedural steps, yatyadukat, the vikamavakai fulakai, meaning there are stages of offense involved in the formal Sangha act itself.
So what exactly does this Rule 10 forbid? What's the core prohibition?
It directly targets any monk who persists in trying to break up a united Sangha or who keeps championing a known divisive issue, what the text calls a Badanasa Vatanika Adhikarana.
And does the text define what united Sangha or breaking the Sangha means?
Yes, it's quite specific. A united Sangha is monks living together harmoniously within the same boundary, sharing the same formal acts. Breaking the Sangha is defined as actively seeking sides, forming groups, asking things like, how can we make these monks separate from those monks? Actively trying to create factions.
And the divisive issue.
That refers to what the tradition calls the 18 grounds for schism, specific points of doctrine or practice that were known potential fault lines. The rule essentially says you can't keep pushing one of these known divisive points if the Sangha has asked you to stop.
Okay, so let's say a monk is doing this, promoting division. What's the process according to the rule? Is it immediate punishment?
No, and this is really interesting, showing the emphasis on reconciliation. First, other monks are supposed to talk to him privately, Tell him, hey, stop this, it's divisive, reconcile with the Sangha.
Okay, an informal warning first.
Right. If he ignores that and keeps going, he commits a lesser offense, a dukkata, wrongdoing.
Then what?
Then it gets formal. The Sangha as a whole officially admonishes him, and they have to do this 3 times. The text says, Yavatatya samanupasitabo tasapini sagaya. He's to be admonished up to the 3rd time to get him to relinquish the issue.
3 formal warnings by the entire community.
Exactly. It's only if he still refuses to drop the divisive issue after that 3rd formal admonition that he commits the full Saṅghādisesa offense.
That's quite a process, a lot of opportunity to step back.
It really emphasizes trying to bring the person back into harmony before resorting to this serious penalty.
Are there any exceptions? What if someone is, genuinely not thinking clearly?
Yes, the rule is very specific about exceptions, too. A monk doesn't commit the offense if the formal admonishment process wasn't carried out correctly, or, crucially, if he does relinquish the issue at any point during the admonishments.
Makes sense.
Also, there's no offense if the monk is insane or has a temporarily disturbed mind or is overcome by severe physical illness. And interestingly, there's an exception for the adhikamaka, the first offender, in the sense of the very first monk who might raise such an issue before it's formally settled, though the implications there are complex.
So this careful, multi-step process, the warnings, the exceptions,
Yeah.
what does that tell us about the values here?
It speaks volumes, I think, about the incredible value placed on Sangha unity, yes, but also on due process, on compassion, on giving people every chance to correct their course. It's not just about punishment, it's about preserving the community fabric while also being fair to the individual.
So we've really covered a lot of ground here, from Devadatta's pretty bold scheme
Very bold.
and his 5-point strategy to the Buddha's really wise, balanced response. Not just rejecting, but reframing.
Finding that middle way.
And then seeing how that whole conflict directly led to this Saṅghādisesa rule, this incredibly detailed mechanism designed to protect the community's harmony going forward.
And if you sort of step back from the ancient context, it's fascinating, isn't it? This whole episode is a case study in leadership and how you handle internal dissent, how you deal with challenges to authority, and the difficulties of keeping any group cohesive when people have different ideas about the right way.
That tension between individual freedom, or maybe individual preference, and the needs of the collective group.
It's a timeless issue. We see it everywhere, not just in monasteries. How much flexibility can a group allow? When does a differing viewpoint become dangerously divisive? The Buddha's response here offers one model allowing latitude, but drawing a firm line when the core unity is threatened.
So for you, listening in, maybe this dive gives you a window into how these profound ethical codes and disciplinary rules don't just appear out of nowhere. They often come directly out of messy, real-world situations, human conflicts, ambitions.
Real human dynamics.
Exactly. And this story is a powerful reminder, I think, that even movements built on deep spiritual principles have to grapple with things like ambition, manipulation, and the really tricky question of what purity or discipline actually means for a community trying to thrive together.
It's not always straightforward.
Definitely not. So maybe something to ponder for yourself. Thinking about this balance between, say, personal conviction or preference and the harmony of the whole.
Yeah.
How does that play out in the communities you're part of? Where's that line drawn?